Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next and final update to the Ontario federal election forecast series. So, obviously, the election is tomorrow as of the posting of this video, and there's going to be no need for more any of these projections until 2026, presumably, because it looks like Doug Ford is going to win by a crushing majority. So, just as another note, I will be doing a live stream tomorrow. I believe the election, I'm going to double check this, but I'll post on my Twitter at @BagelPolling if I change this. I am expecting my understanding is the voting stops at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Ontario time. A bit redundant there. So I'm going to aim to start the stream somewhere around 8:30 Eastern Time, and I will continue until the election is either decided or until I need to go to sleep or until people stop watching. I'm expecting, based off of the results I have in my model, the results 338 has and a couple other people, that this election will likely be decided by 12 Eastern Time and not be worth covering anymore. It just looks like Doug Ford is going to blow out so many areas that he should have more than enough seats safe call him relatively soon, or relatively short in the counting. But we will see how that goes. Now, let us get into what has happened. So not many days have occurred since the last video on Sunday, May 29th, for those watching this in the future. But there's been a large change in the projection. So the Liberals have lost a bit of ground, Greens have lost a bit of ground, NDP have kind of picked up the popular vote ground, but they have lost a bunch of seats. Ford has also gained a bunch of ground. Notably, Ford has gained a bunch of steam in Northern Ontario and in Toronto, the city of Toronto itself, which is a bit surprising. He's also doing better in Eastern Ontario, a bit surprising to me, at least. Maybe residents in Ontario might have different thoughts of what's different. And he seems to be doing quite well in the industrial, or at least former industrial cities in Southern Ontario, like Hamilton and London, and Niagara. It looks like here that the last round of debates that occurred has really devastated Del Duca. That is the only real event that I can think of that has happened in about the last week. And remember, polls lag popular opinion because how the nature of polling works. You poll people in the past, and then you aggregate it for a couple of days, and then post it in the future. So if nothing else, just the methodology of doing a poll inherently means it is previous people's opinions, and they can change. So, all told, it seems like the debates were the deciding factor for sinking Del Duca's horse. Now, he wasn't doing hot going into last week, and I believe last week was the last debate. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, and if so, then I'll throw my hands up. I'm not really sure why Del Duca is taking such a big hit. But from last Monday to this Monday, to today, which is Wednesday, Del Duca seems to have lost about 3 percentage points in the polling aggregate. Now, it's not like a firm 3 percentage points in the polling aggregate. Like, there's always a lot of wiggle room. Like, his upper end was 28-ish, and his lower end was 26-ish, and now his upper end is 24, his bottom end is 24, and his upper end is like 27-ish. Like, so it's not quite a clean distinction. But the important distinction is his polling numbers have fallen, notably. The NDP are relatively flat. They have a decent amount of variance per poll, but there's no real obvious trend. And the PCs are definitely regaining ground. Now, why does Del Duca seem to do poorly in debates? I don't quite know. Maybe it's just a matter of he's kind of boring. Like, he's not the most exciting politician. He also doesn't seem to be outwardly very passionate about anything. He doesn't really have a lot of energy to him. He's kind of flat, kind of boring. So that could very well have undermined him a bit. Or it could very well be the case that people are starting to strategically vote, and they're saying that in the polls, so people in ridings where they don't think the Liberals are going to win are saying they're going to vote NDP again. That could be true, and if we assume here for a second this is actually peak strategic voting, then the NDP and Liberals might actually outperform 32 seats collectively. But if we don't assume mass coordinated strategic voting, then it's not likely to be the case, because when the two parties are this same pretty similar vote share, it's unlikely that you're going to see strategic voting across party lead to anything useful, because you're going to have as many Liberals strategically voting NDP as other way around, and the only way that's going to work is if people know specifically which ridings to strategically vote in, or which party is most likely to win. And yes, typically speaking, there's very few, if any, multi-party seats up for grabs. It's mostly one party, or there's two main parties. But again, that requires a lot of voter information, and I'm just skeptical that that amount of voter information is available to people at this day and age. But we'll see. Doug Ford, now, I said, has gained some ground, and I will post here. He mostly seems to be picking up some steam from the Ontario Party and the New Blues. He's gained about 0.5, and they've lost collectively about 0.5 with some rounding. He's only about a percentage point behind his 2018 performance. But generally speaking, his vote is much more efficient now. So he's likely going to be doing a lot better. And specifically, or even more so, not only is his vote more efficient, his opponent's votes are less efficient now. So why might the Ontario Party and the New Blues voters be more willing to back Ford again? Well, that's not really clear to me. I don't have a good thumb to why that would be happening. Now, it's worth noting that by polling, most of the New Blue or Ontario Party voters have come from the PCs, which shouldn't be that surprising. Now, a large percentage of Ontarians don't vote, but typically speaking, you don't really see non-voters become voters for minor parties. It occurs, for sure. I think that is a meaningful percentage of the People's Party's federally voters are voters who would not vote otherwise. But I'm not expecting that to have been a large contributor to those two parties. A lot of it seems to be coming from the dissatisfied right wing of the Progressive Conservatives. Why they might be coming back home at this stage in the campaign, I don't really know. There's no good reason, electorally, why that would make sense. Doug Ford's only extended his lead at this point in the campaign, so it's not like he's at a risk of losing to the Liberals or NDP. He can't point and be like, they could form a coalition government, because no one believes it. It's possible that the polling has just been over-ambitious for them up until now, and the polling is starting to get a bit more accurate with their actual numbers will be, and it's not a case of these voters are returning to the PC party, it's just that they never left because of polling sampling. That is possible, and until we see the election results, that's what I'm going with as my leading theory, that, the New Blues and Ontario Party were never actually the level that they were at. And in fact, if we go here, I expect the Ontario Party here to actually be overperforming. I fully expect it's actually closer to 1.2 is what it's going to get. The new blues, it depends. I could see a potential that new blues outperform this 3%, but that's only going to be if Cambridge here, which I'm pointing to, goes to Belinda Carriolos. If, like I suspect, as my model, she's going to lose, well, I think the new blues are going to actually underperform 3%. But, as I said before, and I'll say again, surprise holds are not uncommon. They're not common, but they do occur. A example that I use all the time is the most recent Nova Scotia election. Elizabeth McCrossan, who was booted out of the Nova Scotia PC party, ran as an independent and won with a larger vote share than she did in the previous election in Nova Scotia in 2017 as an independent with a spoiler candidate against her. Because she was very well liked in her riding, people thought she was doing a good job representing them. So, if the people of Cambridge, Ontario really like Belinda Carriolos, she could easily win, and no one will call it unless you have a lot of riding level poll data. But we don't have a lot of riding level polling data, and my model doesn't consider it anyways. So I think it's unlikely that she will actually pull out a win. But it's not unconceivable, or inconceivable, I should say. It does happen. So, where are we overall in Ontario? Well, we are in a very, very tight, very close race for second place. But in a lot of ways, unlike most second place races that occur in Canada, there isn't there's no guarantee, and in fact is almost the opposite, that both Del Duca and Horwath will remain as leaders. So, in other words, I think both politicians are almost certainly toast. This is their likely last election as leader. Regardless of how well the Liberal Party performs, Del Duca is almost certainly going to lose his own seat. I applaud him for running again in Vaughan Woodbridge, but there's just no conceivable way that I could see him pulling out a win there. It's not, strictly speaking, impossible, but it is very likely not going to happen. And in fact, I will actually pull up his exact chances right now. He's forecast to be down at 35% versus the PC candidate who's getting about 44% of the vote. So, not even a particularly close race, and if he loses his seat, he's almost certainly going to not maintain as leader. In fact, if he doesn't personally resign, I would be shocked. I've not heard of a case where a leader has lost their own seat and didn't resign. I guess other than cases where... no, I guess there's the PPC federally. Though that's kind of a different story. It's very unlikely that a major party would keep up. A major party leader would not resign after losing their seat. That seems like the thing of a smaller fringe party like the Greens or the People's Party. And I say fringe not as how like Trudeau refers to a fringe group of radicals. Fringe isn't, they're small. Horwath, on the other hand, after 4 elections and mediocre performance, except that one time the Liberals died in 2018, is almost certainly going to get tossed for losing 24 seats and 10 percentage points of the popular vote. There's just no way she can spin that in her favor at all. All of the ground the NDP in Ontario have made since 2008 undone in a single election doesn't sell good for her. And then you have non-first order political considerations. There's 6 different trade unions endorsing Doug Ford over Horwath. The NDP, the party that normally takes union endorsements for granted and is the self-described champion of the working class, has the advocacy organizations for the working class, unionized workers, citing 100% against them. Now, I don't know if places like the unions like the IBEW are actually campaigning, running ads against Horwath, but I know Luna is running ads against Del Duca, or at least says their president. So it is a very sharp swing. And in fact, it is worth considering for Ontarians that it seems that the NDP is not intentionally, but culturally shifting away from its traditional voter base. It looks like a lot of the activist levels of the NDP, a lot of the leadership of the NDP is no longer entirely focusing on working class issues. It is very well seen federally with Singh, but specifically in Ontario, especially the platform Horwath has run, it seems much more catering to the woke, university-educated crowd than it is to tradespeople, which is, to me, seems like not just a blunder electorally, but a major blunder strategically, because the Liberal Party's core demographic has typically always been urban, highly educated urban people. If the NDP starts trying to muscle in on highly educated urban people, which they appear to be, you're going to get a situation where much of Ontario is effectively uncontested. And in fact, we kind of have that situation right now in Ontario. We look at some of these ridings, like just pick up Oxford here, for example. Oxford is effectively uncontested. There is an NDP and a Liberal and a Green and a New Blue and an Ontario Party candidate. But none of them come anywhere close meaningfully to even potentially, theoretically, in a pipe dream winning the riding. They are so far back that it's basically a shoo-in for any progressive conservative candidate nominated there right now. And there's a bunch of other ones that are exactly like this, that are just, the progressive conservatives are so far in the lead and the opposition is so divided, it's not even a contest. You look at the GTA. A lot of the GTA is like this. The Liberals are doing okay in some parts of the GTA, and the NDP are doing okay in some parts of the GTA. For example, Brampton is mostly the NDP at second place, whereas places like Mississauga are closer to the Liberals. But more and more, a lot of ridings in Ontario are looking like the progressive conservatives well out in the front, with a mediocre Liberal and a mediocre NDP opponent. Mediocre as in vote share. And then on the flip side, you have places like downtown Toronto, which are hyper-competitive between the Liberals and the NDP. So there's some ridings where the Liberals and the NDP get a blowout the vote share between the two of them, but they're hyper-competing with each other. Places like Central Ottawa are also very similar to this. And then you have other ridings, like Oxford here. I'm picking this one just because I know the name is Oxford. Like, technically, like, this one are better ridings, or that one, but I don't know the names of them. the PCs are blowing out so hard that the opposition is so divided that a lot of seats, in effect, are just almost certainly guaranteed seats for the PCs. Yet, unlike, say, the federal, the PCs are also extremely competitive in Niagara, Hamilton, apparently, Oakville, London, Windsor. They're in second place in both ridings in Windsor. Generally speaking, all of Northern Ontario, except this one, for some reason. I don't know what's different about this riding compared to the rest of Northern Ontario, but the PCs are doing only mediocre there. It's NDP's in second place, the Liberals. And the suburbs of Toronto, i.e. I guess more properly the outskirts, because technically this is all Toronto, but the outskirts of Toronto and the outskirts of Ottawa, the PCs also do quite well. So, the PCs are effectively competitive everywhere except super urban Ottawa and super urban Toronto, the downtown cores, and I suppose this one spot of Hamilton. They're not at all competitive there. And the NDP and the Liberals are only competitive. In the case of the Liberals, they're pretty much only competitive in Ottawa and Toronto. And they pretty much... Again, I don't actually know... I don't know why these two are so liberal. It's kind of weird, but they are. Maybe someone from Northern Ontario or maybe Ontario General might be able to tell me why these two places are slightly different. I suppose I could probably look into the demographic data, but I don't have the time in my life to look at it for every single weird riding like that. So, what is the point of this whole spiel here? Well, if the NDP and the Liberals both decide to just completely give up on working class people, we're going to get a situation in Ontario where Ford or any future PC leader is likely going to start winning by default. Until either the NDP or the Liberal Party dies, but at the moment, it's not even clear if they will die, because they could very well just get stuck forever, like this, out of sheer bitter pride, because, as I've noted many times before, left-wing parties and left-wing factions are more prone... The left wing in general is more prone to having multiple parties over minor differences in opinion than the right wing is. So we could very well be a situation where these two parties, the NDP and the Liberals, persist way longer than they probably should, strategically speaking. But we will see. But make no mistake here. If you are an NDP or a Liberal voter, this is a dire election for you. Not because Doug Ford's going to win. Frankly, I don't think Doug Ford is going to do anything particularly conservative. I don't think he's going to do anything particularly not conservative, but he doesn't seem to be a very right-wing fellow. As I've said before, I rate him somewhere in like the 2 to 4 range of right-wingedness. Almost certainly going to do some fiscally conservative things, probably not going to do many socially conservative things. And socially conservative doesn't just mean things like abortion. There's like the conservative opinion on any social issue. There's plenty of them. Maybe I'm using the term wrong. Maybe you are using the term wrong. One of us is wrong. Challenge me below in the comments if you think I'm the wrong one. I might be. But that said, it very well is a huge strategy problem. Because I do not see a way out of this, barring an extremely charismatic leader from either the Liberals or the NDP, or the other party having just an absolutely abysmal leader, I suppose. There's no easy end to where this is. To this relatively disastrous for the Ontario left's political performance, up and until, again, a very charismatic NDP Liberal leader shows up, a very uncharismatic Liberal or NDP leader shows up, or the incumbent PC premier, in this case Ford, does something really bad. But, and really bad, I should note, doesn't even necessarily mean like making a mistake or doing something egregious like shooting a baby in broad daylight, but it could just be doing a thing that people in Ontario don't want. But since Ford is fairly centrist for conservative in Canada, I just can't imagine him doing anything that is going to be remotely offensive to the average person. At least to his voters. Because that's the other thing to consider. It doesn't particularly matter if, in this case, if 50% of Ontario absolutely hates Ford. They can't decide on who they like anyways. And if you look at approval ratings, Ford's approval rating is higher than both Horwath, Del Duca, and Schreiner. Which is another reason why people arguing that the first past the post system is wrong in this case, or this is an unjust election because of that. Like, let's be honest here. Ford is the most preferred prime minister. He has the most popular party. And his opposition is more divided and less popular than last time around. His left opposition, that is. This isn't a failure of the system. And I've said this in other places, and I'll say this here. A lot of people have electoral failure either by the party that they are voting for not representing how they feel. For example, very right-wing Ontarians might feel Doug Ford is a sellout, or they don't like him for that. That's one type of electoral failure. Or it could be left-wingers being like, first past the post sucks, we're losing. That's nonsense. There's not a single electoral system that is actually used in reality that would not create an analogous situation to this. It wouldn't be exactly the same, but it wouldn't be different as well. You're always going to get a situation where a large amount of people don't like the leader, but they don't actually have enough people to defeat the incumbent leader. Either because of votes, or because of coalitions, because the political spectrum is so divided that it's super easy for the premier to pick whoever they want as a coalition partner. There's a bunch of reasons. Every single system has its flaws. In a way, crying that the electoral system is unfair is almost always the creed of the loser who doesn't want to accept the election. It is one of the most disingenuous and, frankly, harmful things in a democracy to decry its electoral system every time you lose and then stay silent every time you win. Because make no mistake, Liberal voters in Ontario, or Liberal Party members in Ontario, crying about this election's unfair because of first past the post had 18 years to do something differently if they wanted to. Now, they probably wouldn't have gotten approval from the majority of the populace because every single time a referendum in Canada happens, the majority of people don't want to switch the voting system. Because, as I said before, and I'll say again, there are pros and cons of different voting systems. They're all flawed. Mathematically, objectively speaking, they are all flawed. And there's some great videos on YouTube if you're interested in that. I could probably link them below if you want. I'll comment if you want that. But ignoring all of that, there's always going to be edge cases that people think are unfair in every system. There's a lot of yelling on Twitter right now about it should be proportional representation. Great. Okay, Ontario's proportional representation. Well, you're not going to have these 4 parties. In fact, you're not even going to have these 6 parties. You're going to have likely a lot. In the case, I believe Sweden uses a 4% margin, and I believe Sweden has 8 parties. Some are kind of small, some are not. If you don't have a margin, like the Netherlands, though by proxy they always have a margin because there is a minimum number, there's a finite number of seats. You're going to have so many parties that the largest single party, in the case of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte's party, has plenty of people he can make coalitions with to form government. Changing the voting system is not a panacea to electoral failure. Your performance in one system doesn't mean diddly squat to performance in a different system, because, newsflash, voters are not monkeys. They vote according to the system. If you're in a proportional system, at least 8 parties are running who are going to have win seats. At least 8. To think that you're going to have 8 parties in Ontario and Doug Ford can walk away with the largest vote share and not be able to form a government of some kind because he gets first choice is, frankly, it's lunacy. Now, it would be a coalition government, but at this point, again, First Past the Post has pre-built coalitions. Just to say progressive conservatives, just the 2 main wings. You have the moderate, and then you have the social conservative wing. Those 2 factions in a proportional system would be 2 different parties, which would almost certainly just coalition most of the time. And in fact, in Sweden, you have literally that. There are 2 parties about the same size, the moderate party and the Sweden Democrats. One is the moderate conservative, one is the social conservative party. Wow. Big shock. Changing the voting system doesn't change the election result. It is really the creed of losers who do not want to accept they lost the election because they ran either a bad campaign or had a bad platform. But with that, I will see some of you, hopefully all of you, tomorrow to see the election night coverage. It will be my first attempt at election night coverage, so there's going to be some kinks, but, well, you only have to solve those once, maybe. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below what you think, comment below on your predictions if you think it can be right, vote shares, vote totals, who's going to take second place. That's a big guess. You get no points for guessing who's going to win. Unless, in fact, Ford loses. In that case, you do get a lot of points. As always, if you want to keep up to date with the channel, or random things I post at times, or random memes I post, follow me on Twitter at @BagoPoland. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.